Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. My name is Sophia Arend, and I'm the Global Blockchain Business Council's Communications and Content Lead. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the GBBC and Global Digital Finance's Global Leaders Series. This is a weekly global town hall we host with policymakers and business leaders around the world to hear insights into their work, the state of blockchain and digital asset industry, and current global affairs. And today we have the pleasure to be joined by Netta Korin. She is co-founder at Orbs and the Hexa Foundation, and GBBC's Chief Operating Officer, Mercina Tillemann, for a conversation and live audience Q&A on Netta's journey to founding Orbs, Orbs' hybrid blockchain, their work in the DeFi space, as well as how they're utilizing blockchain for social impact and to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Just briefly before we begin, I'd like to introduce Netta. As I mentioned, she's co-founder of Orbs and a founder at the Hexa Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of Orbs that aims to use blockchain technology for social impact. Prior to Orbs, Netta served as senior advisor to General Mordechai on special projects in the Ministry of Defense and as senior advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister for Diplomacy in the Prime Minister's office. She began her career on Wall Street as an investment banker and later became a hedge fund manager. And she has extensive experience in philanthropy and for over 15 years has served on multiple boards in Israel and America, holding high-level positions in executive committees. We'll hear more about her journey to founding Orbs today, and we welcome your questions at any point during today's conversation. You can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And without further ado, I'll hand things over to Mercina to get started.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And Netta, it is truly a privilege to have you here with us. Wonderful to see you looking so well. I wish we were having this conversation in person, but this is the next best thing, and we'll take it for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you again, and it's great to be here. And yeah, I hope maybe next year we could do this in person and not in Zoom.
Looking forward to it, counting down the moments. To start, it was really fun to hear Sophia's summary of your background, which is incredible. And I'm wondering if you can give us a brief overview of how you went from Wall Street investment banker and hedge fund manager to government advisor and ultimately the founder of a blockchain company.
So I guess I do have a little bit of a strange background for the industry because I don't really come from a tech background at all. Most of the people here at Orbs either have an engineering background or they're graduates of elite cyber units in the IDF. And like you said, I started off in finance. I was an investment banker at Lehman Brothers. A few years later, I moved to the buy side. I ran 2 hedge funds for C.V. Cohen, one in London and one in New York. And then I left and started my own hedge fund. In 2009, I left Wall Street and moved to Israel, mainly because I wanted to focus on philanthropy and things that I was passionate about. At a certain point, I even opened my own restaurant. So I did a variety of things. And after I got married, a few years after my youngest was born, I started working as an advisor for Dr. Michael Oren, who was then Deputy Prime Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's office. And Michael was there at the time when our Prime Minister was also our Foreign Minister. So there was a lot of foreign ministry stuff that actually fell in our lap. And then I got to deal a lot with Palestinian issues, which was super interesting. From there, I moved to the Ministry of Defense and became advisor to one of Israel's best known generals, General Mordechai. And that was also an amazing journey. And actually, that was where I really first got the blockchain bug, and I'll explain why. We were meeting on the border of Gaza with one of President Trump's envoys to the Middle East, and giving him a tour. And in one of the meetings that we had, the World Food Program presented how they transfer funds to Gazans in order to ensure that that they're well fed. And during that meeting, they also told us about a project in Jordan that they were running for 100,000 undocumented refugees that came from Syria. And so I thought this was interesting. I left the meeting, I started looking into it, and I realized that this is a blockchain-based pilot that the World Food Program was running, and that within a month of running it, they had lowered their transfer cost of funds by something like 97%. But not just that, they were actually seeing their donation dollars go from A to Z. And I guess, you know, looking at my career, at everything I did, Wall Street and philanthropy and government work, I found this super interesting because for me, especially at the Prime Minister's office, when we had tried to, let's say, build infrastructure projects in neighboring countries, then it was a well-known fact that aid funds or money for infrastructure projects would not be received in its entirety to the destination, and that somehow it would end up in either a general's pocket or in leadership of that country in their personal funds. That was like the norm. That was widely accepted, and there was not much anyone could do about that. And I looked at this technology and said, oh my God, this is going to change the world. Now, granted, this was, you know, a few years ago in 2017, and I was a little bit naive and maybe a little bit optimistic, but I literally thought at that moment, this is going to change foreign aid. This is going to change donations. We can make a huge impact. And really, I got the blockchain bug. When General Mordechai retired from the Army, I was approached by my partners at Orbs, and it was a no-brainer. It was just something that by that point I was so passionate about that I wanted to be a part of. So that's how I came to blockchain.
Thank you so much for that. I love that context for the rest of our conversation. And it's interesting because I remember one of the very first use cases I heard about blockchain in 2015 or 16 was the foreign aid delivery. And it really struck me too as such a powerful device because of the incredible opacity which exists when you send those dollars, and the potential to open things up seemed really exciting. I think when you hear about the technology associated with a use case like that, you get incredibly excited about the broader implications of it.
Completely. And I would just say that a few months into partnering and starting Orbs, I launched the Hexa Foundation. And the goal of the Hexa Foundation was to actually use our blockchain technology for social impact, for projects just like that. You know, how can we change the world with this technology? So it's been an amazing journey, and I'm really proud and happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk more about what exactly you're doing with Hexa and Orbs. And for those in the audience who might not be as familiar, can you tell us about Orbs and what makes you and what makes you different from all of the other blockchain companies?
Sure. So Orbs was established 4 years ago. We're in Tel Aviv. I'm in Tel Aviv as we speak. Well, happily, it's peaceful here now. If we had this discussion about 2 weeks ago, it would have been a little bit more noisy. But we have offices in Tel Aviv, in Seoul, in Tokyo, Singapore, and London. And we're the largest blockchain company in Israel. Now, my partners at Orbs had multiple years of experience in the crypto space even before we met. And actually, they started a consulting company to help established companies transition into blockchain. So one of the things that they realized pretty quickly back then was that existing blockchain infrastructure was not really sufficient for their client base. So in 2017, Orbs was launched with the goal of creating a blockchain infrastructure aimed at enterprise and governments, but with multiple value adds that they sensed from their client base that was missing from their experience in consultants. And if you remember, in 2017, basically everything was on Ethereum, which is funny to say because in 2021. It mostly still is. I mean, there are other blockchains out there, like you see some activity on Binance Smart Chain or on Polkadot, but mostly the entire industry still works on Ethereum. And Ethereum is great, but it's difficult to work on for a few reasons. It's not very scalable. It's expensive, especially now. Now it's very expensive with the rise up in price, and it's also difficult to develop on, right? I'm the last person in the world to tell you the difference between various coding languages, but I think any developer will tell you that Solidity is more difficult to write smart contracts with. So Orbs try to take all that into account and build a more user-friendly blockchain infrastructure. So this kind of influenced our entire network design. For example, on Orbs, you can write in common languages like JavaScript or Go. So normal people who don't have a lot of blockchain experience can write code for Orbs. And also, we give the flexibility of moving from a private to a public blockchain. So we're a hybrid blockchain. You may have seen this in the last few years of your activity as well, but I think a lot of enterprise or governments, even in the heydays of blockchain when everyone was excited about it, right? Every innovation department wanted to do something, they were still hesitant to go completely public. So the ability to start private and move into public is something that allows them a higher comfort level, and that's what Orbs provide. So I guess to summarize my Orbs elevator speech, I would say we're the user-friendly blockchain.
Thank you so much for that. And I'll just mention, I guess it was 2 years ago now, we had a hackathon where Orbs participated with the World Food Program, with the City of New York. And it was so exciting to see these new developers start building on Orbs. Your team was phenomenal, and it was really cool to see what they were able to do in just a few days.
That's right. They right away, the developers were able to build something, and that's, you know, that's a credit to how this network was built.
Yeah, absolutely. So a few months ago, Orbs presented in one of our virtual forums on building a blockchain-based health passport to facilitate travel and other movement during the pandemic. And I'm wondering how that project is now and where it's going.
So I would say the short answer to that question is we learned a lot from our passport proposal. And I think what we learned there really helped us shift our short-term or medium-term focus for Orbs. The idea behind the vaccination project, just for people who aren't familiar with it, was to enable governments to coordinate and trust documentation from other countries regarding COVID-19 vaccines. And we were working with a large SI on the proposal, and we learned a few things which I think are critical in looking at any blockchain use case. One, governance is an issue. Actually, I think it's the most challenging issue facing blockchain technology today, because in theory, what does blockchain do? It allows multiple parties who don't trust each other to work together, right? That sounds great, but actually getting them to do that is a major challenge and roadblock. It's something that takes way too much time because there's a lot of politics involved, and it's very challenging. So in the specific use case that we had proposed for the COVID-19 passport, I think it would have been successful had a central body like the World Health Organization coordinated everyone to get on board. Okay, at Orbs or even at the Hexa Foundation, we were not able to make that happen. And not to mention, I think one of the other things we realized, other than governance, is when let's say the first player in the consortium who wants to start a blockchain, if they have to carry the burden of cost for everyone else who's going to use the system later, there's a real hesitancy to do that. But maybe I'll caveat and say that while we were working on that use case and in general looking for social impact potential, how to help the world during Corona, what really struck me is what a fantastic use case supply chain for the COVID-19 vaccine, or really for our next pandemic, because I think we've all kind of wisened up and realized that this might be part of our life going forward. You know, the world is flat and everyone now gets sick at the same time, or one after the other. And when we were in this process and speaking to a large and significant pharmaceutical company, they told us that their pain was the lack of clear visibility in their supply chain. So whether it's fraudulent products or stolen products or gray market products, they just couldn't have the visibility for that. And I think this is really something like a World Health Organization could benefit the entire globe by implementing a blockchain-based supply chain for vaccines for future pandemics. Because think about it, what I said earlier about governance, right? So you need to have an incentive for all the players to want to work together. And I think during Corona, every country had an incentive to have a transparent supply chain because everyone wanted vaccinations that they could verify as true, given to their population. And sadly, developing countries often get the raw end of the stick with that. You know, they either get fake goods or they don't get goods at all because they're lost somewhere along the way. Somebody, you know, they fell off a truck and somebody stole them and took them to other countries. So I think that's a really, really good use case to think about going forward.
I completely agree. I think, first of all, critical that we plan now for these things that we can anticipate will happen again. And the challenge of, you know, counterfeits and distribution generally really requires stakeholders at the highest level to buy in, because you can build the technology, but unless you have network adoption, it's only so useful. And I think that will be probably the next challenge, because we have solved so many of the technological issues related to implementation, but getting the right group of stakeholders to buy onto some of these larger projects will be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the technology portion is actually, that's the easy part, right? If you know, if you were to say, you know, Netta, the World Health Organization wants a blockchain-based supply chain, you know, poof, within 6 months or 3 months, you know, we can have it up and running on a technological basis. But getting all the players involved, wow, you know, that's a long way away.
Absolutely, but incremental progress. So thinking back on the last year, I'm curious to understand how your work has changed. I know we used to see each other not infrequently, which is a bit crazy considering I'm in DC and you're in Israel. That was kind of the lifestyle, and I'm curious to hear how your work has changed, how the work that Orbs is doing has changed, what changes you're ready to leave behind, and what you think will be valuable to embrace moving forward.
So first of all, I think all of us on a personal level can identify, you know, with how challenging it was working from home. I can tell you that I mean, I wish I could say my work wasn't influenced, but I'll be politically correct and politically incorrect and say that I had two small girls at home that I needed to homeschool, and could not spend as much time as I would have liked to following up on projects. But I think in general, because also my main focus is also on social impact projects and on the Hexa Foundation, a lot of what we were doing with the former administration in the US. So it wasn't just Corona, it was also the change in administration that really altered the amount of work I could spend on projects, because the people that I had been working with just weren't there anymore, and the people that had replaced them were really busy trying to, understand what they were doing and how to tackle Corona. So on the foundation side, we kind of shifted gears, and instead of pushing projects forward, we expanded towards more thought leadership. And I think, you've seen us put out a lot of writing and a lot of pieces on what blockchain can be used for in terms of social impact. So we ramped that up. And I would say, Orbs also saw the shift, and where beforehand, when you and I were meeting all across the world, there was this just time span of huge excitement from enterprise and innovation departments on using blockchain. And I think that kind of calmed down for various reasons, but also due to Corona. And so Orbs shifted more towards DeFi and kind of understood that it's going to take enterprises or governments longer than we thought to embrace the technology.
And I'm curious now, especially as Israel is beginning to open up more, you're back in the office, which is very exciting. I'm curious if you have experienced kind of a renewed interest in some of these solutions. I know from our perspective, while progress is slow and incremental, there has been a renewed recognition that the existing systems are not adequate to meet present challenges. And I'm wondering if you've had a similar experience, or what you've felt, especially as things are opening up again.
So it's funny you should ask, because actually yesterday I got a call from one of the top guys in the MOD here asking to look at our proposed solution for fund traceability. And while I embrace those kind of conversations and requests, I think I do it with a more mature understanding that we're not going to have a project on the tape in a year, that this is a process. And I'm here for however long that process will take, because it's very important to me on a personal level. I really do believe that we can make a significant change and social impact with what we're trying to do. So I don't mind if it takes 3 years. Whereas, like I said, in 2017, I was very naive, and I thought that within a year, the entire donation and foreign aid would be transparent and immutable for all. Now I understand that it takes a lot more effort, but eventually we'll get there. And I really believe that it will be worth the wait, and it will be worth the effort. So I'm patient, but I don't expect things to snap back. And I don't expect, like I said, a project within the next year to be embraced by a government.
Spoken like a true veteran of the space.
Yeah.
You mentioned DeFi, and I know Orbs has been more active in DeFi, especially over the last several months. To start, can you define what DeFi is for Orbs, and then speak a little bit to some of the projects that you're working on in the space?
Sure. So this is less my focus at Orbs. It's really more Tal and Daniel's department, but I'm happy to talk about it, and I'm happy to explain it because I really believe that there's huge potential for innovation here for the way traditional finance functions. And I also think that DeFi has a role in social impact. So DeFi stands for decentralized finance, meaning applications that run in a decentralized manner on the blockchain. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of TVL, which is total value of assets locked in various DeFi instruments, but TVL is something very important that people look at in DeFi. And just so you get a sense of how fast this segment has grown, in June of last year, TVL was $1 billion. There was $1 billion of value locked in DeFi instruments. And a year later, there's 88 billion. So it went from $1 billion to 88 billion. And while that's still small compared to traditional financial markets, you can't ignore it anymore. You know, it's something that you need to pay attention to. And maybe what I'll do is, because, you know, I know even many of my Wall Street friends, when I mention DeFi, don't know what it is. So maybe I'll just give a one example of a DeFi instrument to clarify. Is that okay? Okay, so in the real world, or in CFI, right, centralized finance, we have exchanges, and I'm pretty sure everyone who's listening to us now knows how an exchange works, right? You have a centralized party matching buyers and sellers, and an order book that in an order book, and then the central party takes a cut. And in the DeFi space, this has been fully automated. It's kind of transformed into a new concept of what's called AMMs, or automatic market makers. And here, instead of the central body, instead of the exchange matching up buyers and sellers, it's a new concept called liquidity pools that enable the trade to happen, but without any involvement of a third party. And it's fully based on a transparent mechanism. So it's actually like a formula that ensures that the ratio between the liquidity pool, so if I'm trying to trade, let's say Ether and dollar, or Bitcoin and dollar, so it's actually a formula that ensures that the ratio between these two pools of dollar and Ether, or dollar and Bitcoin, or whatever coin you want, is remain constant. And it happens in a beautiful way without any third party or counterparty becoming involved. And the interesting thing is that cut that I was talking about, that used to go to the exchange, so now that goes back into the pools, and is actually interest for the liquidity providers who place either Bitcoin or any other coin or dollars in the liquidity pools. And why is this interesting? One, because it's amazing that something just happens without a central body being involved. And if you think about it, like in traditional markets, in order to list a coin, you know, that was generally accompanied by exorbitant fees to the company. And here, anyone can list their coin on an exchange. No one can tell them whether they can or not. You know, they just create liquidity pools, and then whoever wants to trade those or transact with those can do it. So it's very innovative, and I think there's a lot that the traditional financial markets can learn from it. And I think that's a really good example of something that happens in the traditional market that DeFi completely innovated. You know, there are other examples like lending pools or derivative products in DeFi, but you know, you'll need to have a call with either Daniel or Tom to explain those in a more intense manner than I can. And Orbs because of the fact that it's interoperable with Ethereum, then for us, finding DeFi applications for our technology was kind of just a no-brainer. It really made sense for the platform. And initially, we started getting involved in DeFi as investors because the space provides very, very, very high returns. And then as we started learning the space and really becoming experts in it, we began developing technologies to be used. So because of the fact, like I said, there's no central body monitoring things or providing information, then we started creating tools to help optimize the process. And for example, understanding what your real profit is, like taking into account impermanent loss. Impermanent loss happens when your coins fluctuate, and by the end of the trade, you don't know whether or not you actually made money or not. So that's something that Orbs developed, and we are also creating tools to help the traditional financial world, like the CeFi world, incorporate itself or interact with DeFi in a way that allows them to participate, but without exposure to crypto. So for example, if there's a DeFi protocol that you need to deposit in both sides, dollar and crypto, then Orbs created something to enable a single-sided deposit. So the traditional finance side would only need to put in dollars, and then a different player would put in the crypto, and we would help either participant manage the different types of risk for the platform. So that's kind of what Orbs is doing now, and really trying to make a name for ourselves in the DeFi space with our expertise.
Thank you so much for that. And well, we would love to have Daniel on at some point. I think you did a brilliant job explaining it. So thank you. And we actually have a question from the audience about the DeFi accelerator that Orbs is running. I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit.
Not really. I apologize, but it's really not under my department. It's something that Daniel runs. I know that we have several companies or startups that we accepted and are very excited about, but I'm not in the details of that. I apologize.
Well, for whoever asked that question, we can connect you to get more information. We'll be very
happily, yeah.
So just staying on DeFi a little bit longer, because of your experience in the financial services industry, I'm interested to hear your perspective on how you think this will change things moving forward.
Okay, well, in all honesty, I really believe that in order for this not to just stay a niche market, then it needs to have more regulation. Because, I mentioned that DeFi can be regarded as CeFi's innovation lab, but many of the DeFi products, I don't think will ever be adopted in traditional platforms, really for the simple fact that there's no KYC, right? And so it's easy to launder money, and so that's a no-no for traditional finance. But I think, and I gave the example of liquidity pools. So imagine, for example, that was now stocks, right? That, you and I could transact on US equities without a third party. So that's an interesting, that's an interesting segue into the traditional financial world that I think is efficient and could one day be adopted. But I'll tell you, my real excitement from DeFi and from what has transpired in that market has a social impact angle. And maybe it's because I always look for the social impact angle, but I think DeFi helped turn stable coins into a trustworthy asset. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by social impact coming out of that. So remittance payments. Okay, remittance payments have a massive economic effect on developing countries. So, for example, I believe El Salvador, something like 24% of their GDP, if I'm not mistaken, is remittance payments. That's a huge effect. And or really, you know, multiple developing countries. So if we take an example of, say, a caretaker from the Philippines who wants to send money back to her family, the process that she needs to go through is going to a Western Union, sending her, let's say, $100, and then her family will have to go to Western Union, collect the funds. By the time they receive it, you know, they've wasted a lot of money, wasted a lot of time. She wasted a lot of time on her end. They have a lot less cash because in many countries, the transfer fees or commissions that a company like Western Union takes are very high. You know, so theoretically, she could lose even more than 20% on the $100 that she sent. In some countries, she could lose 30%. And that's a real economic impact. Now, because of the fact that stable coins have become trustworthy, imagine for a moment that instead of going through this whole story that I just explained, our caretaker had a mobile digital wallet, and she was able to transfer that stable coin to her family. And poof, overnight, now, you know, in a matter of nanoseconds, not even overnight, the family receives the funds almost in entirety. That's huge value add. And I think that eventually will happen. Now you can say, you know, how are they going to convert the stable coin into their local currency? So, for example, if a large food store decided that they were to accept that stable coin, let's say they decided to accept USDC, which is basically dollar, you know, a digital dollar now, right? And it's well accepted as digital dollar. Investors in the DeFi space have like no hesitation as to what USDC is worth. So if a chain of food stores in the Philippines all of a sudden it decided to accept USDC as payment, so now you have a really easy way without even needing to convert to local currency that people can use the funds that were transferred, and it's 20, 30, 10% more than they would have had. And I think when dealing with the unbanked, first of all, it's a huge population, but they're also very savvy in terms of innovative products, and they're very willing to try them. I think because it makes such an economic impact. So I think this is something that that holds a lot of potential upside for the unbanked, and I think it wouldn't have happened without the DeFi space increasing the trustworthiness of stablecoins.
That is a really interesting perspective, and we have a lot of questions that were spurred by it, but I'm going to wait on them. We'll get back to them because I want to hear a little bit more about the Hexa Foundation. You've mentioned it. I know it's a huge part of what you do, and the potential for social impact projects to come out of blockchain is tremendous, but we usually spend most of our time talking about the financial services applications. And so I'm keen to hear about the applications that you think will have the largest effect on sustainable development and social impact moving forward.
I feel like I'm going to come full circle with with this question to what I spoke about at the beginning of our conversation, but maybe I'll just give a quick blurb on what I do at the Hexa Foundation. So when I launched the Hexa Foundation, blockchain was like a dirty word in Israel specifically. And going into a government office and trying, and saying, that we're a blockchain company and we'd like to help you understand how you can become more efficient and more transparent. All they heard was crypto and money laundering, and so a lot of what we did in the beginning of our efforts was educating governments. And I think we did a really, really good job of that, specifically in Israel. Because there is no government office now that doesn't understand that this can be a tool for something under their responsibility, and we have really good relationships there. So part of what we do is education. Part of what we do is thought leadership. Putting out papers about things that we'd like to see happen in the world, and hopefully one day they will, but not necessarily doing them ourselves. And then part of what we work on is special projects. And I've worked on a plethora of projects, but the reason I said I'd come full circle is because I think the one that will make the most significant impact is really if we are able to use blockchain for fund traceability, for aid. Have you have, I know you've heard of elite capture because you and my mom read my blog, but probably most people on this call have never heard of elite capture. Elite capture means that leaders of a country embezzle aid funds and use them for their own personal use instead of for the people. Why anyone would call that elite capture instead of embezzlement of funds is like being politically correct to the extreme, right? If we just call this embezzlement of funds, I think there would be this huge uproar and people would try and do something about it. But because of the fact that they call it elite capture, nobody really cares. But we should care. The World Bank put out a piece on elite capture, and they detailed how within a decade, $1 billion of their own aid money that the World Bank paid to other countries, $1 billion disappeared. Now, disappeared means, someone bought a Ferrari with it, or, their own private island, or God knows what. But that's ridiculous. It's unacceptable. And it's going to have to change, maybe because of the fact that also multiple governments are really a lot in a more difficult economic situation due to Corona. So people are looking at aid more closely, and there needs to be transparency in that. We need to hold governments accountable to where your tax dollars and my tax dollars are going. And so we need to be less politically correct about how we label things. And at Orbs and at the Hexa Foundation, we worked with one of the world's largest development banks to pilot a system that would allow them to literally trace all their funds from A to Z. And I'm not being naive about this. It doesn't mean that we neutralized fraud completely, because fraud can always occur. If you have a corrupt person entering incorrect data, then that incorrect data will be on the blockchain. It does, it doesn't mean that everything will be, 100% squeaky clean, but it does mean that we can provide for transparency and not allow any data to be altered once it's entered. So there are obviously many uses for this kind of system. Even now in Israel, after our latest war with Gaza, there will be hundreds of millions of dollars pouring in to rebuild Gaza. And it's really important to ask, where is this money going? Because we live in a dangerous neighborhood. So it's not just a question of, is someone using these aid funds to buy a Ferrari? Here, it could mean they're using aid funds to fund terror. And that has to stop. You know, that's something that really nobody should permit. So if you're asking me what I think will make the largest impact on a global level, it's really coming back to what when I first had my blockchain bug. I think this is a technology that can really be used to help donations and foreign aid become more efficient, and we need to demand it, and regulators need to demand it.
I completely agree. I think it's interesting. Even in the United States, we have the same problems. You know, with all of the COVID relief, there has been more transparency now on where many of the funds were allocated, and they weren't allocated to entities who actually needed it. And you know, if there had been real-time transparency, we wouldn't be spending the resources cleaning this up now. We would have allocated things correctly the first time around. And so I think there are applications not just in, you know, developing nations, but as you mentioned, in Israel and that region and the United States, this is something that could have profound implications. And we had a question related to it. When you think about implementation, you had mentioned that maybe the World Health Organization or other UN agencies could build and implement blockchain platforms for tracking some of these funds. Do you think that is more likely than individual governments building blockchain solutions that require, you know, recipients to track things on their platform?
Do I think it's more viable for individual aid organizations to start their own blockchain versus a government doing it? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to depress anyone on this call, but I have to tell you what I've learned, okay? I've learned that for aid organizations, it's quite convenient that not everybody can see where the money goes. Okay, that's sad, I know. But like I said, we built a working pilot for one of the world's largest development banks, and they're not implementing it. So you need to question why. And I think really the change will come only if regulators force it. And maybe regulators will only force it if people demand it, right? If there's some kind of, you know, lobbying of the people against giving aid funds to other countries, and you know, unless we know where the money goes. But it's going to have to be something that we force their hand. I don't see, and again, I spent the last 4 years working on this. I really don't see it happening on a voluntary basis. And I've really spoken with leaders at the top of these organizations, and it's just a very politically challenging thing to request or demand transparency from the countries that they give aid to. You know, there's a political issue there. And so unless somebody's hand is forced, I don't see a change coming.
And you mentioned the importance of getting buy-in from governments and other stakeholders, and that so much of that was relationship-based in Israel. Because there seems to be a real need for inertia on the part of kind of public opinion to drive more of these solutions to actual implementation. You know, we have lots of questions about how there are many pilots, but why are we not actually seeing things implemented on a large scale? What piece does education of the general public play in potentially moving some of these projects to the next phase?
I'm sure it plays some role. Okay, you know, if, like I said, if the public demands visibility and they say, I don't know, we're not paying taxes until you guys straighten out our foreign aid, then maybe. But I don't. I think really also I'll go back to what I claimed we learned with the with our vaccine passport vaccine proposal, that governance is a real issue here, that getting these multiple parties to work together, you really need an incentive. And a lot of times that incentive is just not urgent enough or strong enough for them to work together. Now, part of that is education, okay? And that's why we spend a significant amount of time working with players. You know, I can tell you the large pharmaceutical company that we spoke to, we got to an amazing decision maker who totally got it, you know, who got it. But the entire organization was so busy already dealing with, you know, getting vaccines out, that talking to them about now trying to implement a transparent supply chain was just not relevant. But, you know, maybe once things calm down, then we can say, listen, this is going to happen. Pandemics will return. Let's try and set up now a proper supply chain for the future. And, you know, I think maybe we found someone that can help lead that. So part of it is finding the right decision maker. Part of it is ensuring that there's a correct incentive for multiple players. And I guess part of it is also regulation.
I think you are spot on in so many ways, and it's going to be kind of a perennial challenge to get governments and other entities to recognize the need for these solutions, not just during a crisis when they don't have the bandwidth to implement, but also in preparation for future crises and just to serve their shareholders, their customers, their populations better. But it's a perennial challenge.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions here, but just being mindful of time, I'm going to ask, I think we have answered several of them, but I'm going to ask one, which relates to kind of the industries that you've worked in, which are traditionally very male dominated. And I'm wondering how you've navigated that and what advice you would give to women who are considering looking into fields that are traditionally much more male dominated.
Well, I think industries are much more user-friendly towards women than they ever have been. So in that sense, I think women of this generation are very lucky. There's also an awareness of what is inappropriate in the workplace, which I can tell you, quite frankly, there was none of that when I was literally growing up on Wall Street. In Israel, I give lectures to young women multiple times a year on how to advance in their careers or how to succeed really in whatever they want to do in life. And the first thing I tell them is that they need to have confidence in their abilities. Because really, generally, the only difference between them and their role model in whatever career that they want to have is only time and experience. If someone is smart and works hard, male or female, right, then they can accomplish their goals. I really, really believe in that. I lived that. And I often see women very insecure about their abilities. And then I tell them, fake it till you make it, right? Pretend. Because don't be intimidated. There really is no need to be intimidated by doing something new or something that you don't know how to do. I mean, look at my career, right? I went from Wall Street. I owned a restaurant, you know, I went to be an advisor in the government. I didn't know how to do any of those things. And that lack of knowledge could have kept me from taking a leap. I didn't come from a tech background, and now I'm a co-founder of a technology company, and you know, a leading edge one. That's crazy. But my attitude has always been that failure is a really great learning experience. And so never be afraid to fail, because life is long. and you grow from everything you do. And also you can shift gears, you can start something, and if you don't like it, you do something else, but you take that skill set that you picked up and you just build upon it. So that's the advice that I would give.
Thank you so much for that. And just to wrap things up, the blockchain industry is exploding. It seems like every company we work with is hiring. And so a little bit more generally, for someone interested in working in blockchain specifically, what advice do you have?
Well, there's a wealth of information on the internet. Really, there's in every micro segment of blockchain, there's a wealth of information out there and tutorial videos. And there's also this very welcoming and eager community out there that wants to share and educate. So I would say, first of all, educate yourself. Okay. And then after educating yourself, find out what it is within the space that you're passionate about. Is it social impact? Is it DeFi? Is it, a plethora of options? And I can tell you that, Orbs is always eager to hire talented developers. So the other advice I would give to someone looking for a job is send your resume our way, and we'll be happy to look at it.
Well, thank you so much, Netta.